Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining this capital conversation with Vipul Parekh. Vipul is the co-founder, CMO, and CFO, and also wears many other hats in the company because he's been with the company from day one in late 2012. And I'm happy to also note that Brand Capital has been with the journey right from the beginning, right in end of 2012, beginning of 2013. So we've seen the company from close quarters for the past 7.5 years. And I'm sure Vipul will appreciate our support and benefit that we have been able to give over the years. And prior to starting BigBasket with the 4 other co-founders, Vipul was with People Capital in private equity investing for a few years. And prior to that, he was with Wipro Business Development. And he's a graduate of IIM Bangalore. And I've known Vipul for the past 6 or 7 years. And it's been a great journey for both BigBasket as well as Brand Capital / Bennett Coleman. So Vipul, thank you for taking the time to speak with us this afternoon.
My
welcome.
pleasure, Vish. Thank you very much. And thanks to Shiva and all of you. You've been partners. I think Shiva knows us longer than most of my investors do, which is rare. and I think it's probably unusual for even you guys. But we've been in partnership for almost, I think now a decade. Not too far off. I think another year or so, we'll be completing a decade. So that's really amazing. And thank you for your support. It's been a pleasure. It's also been a very eventful ride. And you've seen us for a long time from where we've come. And I think Bennett Coleman has played an integral role in this. And so from my team and everybody else at BigBasket, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. So let's start with the journey itself. And we just wanted to go back when you started this business. What germinated it? What was the reason for getting into this? And I think you are the pioneers in e-grocery, and today you are the largest in the country. And what has kept you ahead of competition and ahead of others? And what makes you unique?
So history is very interesting. And I think if I may say so, let me dial back to dial-up days, because that's when we really started. Our first venture, e-commerce venture, was actually in '99, where we did a horizontal portal, what Flipkart is today or Amazon is today. And this was way back in '99, probably the first horizontal e-commerce business in India, selling everything. So we were selling books, music. I mean, music was sold those days. We shipped cassettes and CDs, and it sounds very antiquated now, but that's what used to happen, not so far off. And so we used to ship all this. We used to sell jewelry, and we used to sell all of this. And we, as part of that, we launched online grocery way back in 2001, around end of 2001. And this was in dial-up days. So imagine Indian customers dialing up on an internet site and ordering groceries. And surprisingly, and even today I'm quite amazed, it actually became a largest category. And people would love the service. So, and I've always used to wonder, how did they find the time and the patience to log on? And you had to go to that bip, and it would log on, take some time before you really, and pages would load slowly. This was not lightning speed that we're all used to now. And this was probably -1G or whatever in comparative.
It was 256 KB.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it was, the service was very, very well received, did very well. But unfortunately, the entire dot-com bust happened. I think the internet era was forecasted to be about 10 years ahead of what it was supposed to be. And I think we were probably being a little foolish, rushing in with online grocery. I think we were about a decade ahead of time at that point in time. So when that entire dot-com bust happened, we sort of took swallowed that bitter pill and said, maybe we need to relook at a business model. And maybe e-commerce is not really the business that we need to be in. So we actually pivoted to becoming an offline retailer. I think we are probably the only unique people who have gone from online to offline, and most people have gone the other way around. We've gone exactly the reverse direction. So we went from online to offline, and set up from scratch a grocery supermarket chain, which was called FabMall, and we hived off the online business, got out of it, and said we'll do grocery businesses. And the reason we chose grocery was we felt based on our experience, this was a very large market. There was only one large physical retailer. Most people may not even remember now their name, which is Food World. And there was nobody else. And we thought, okay, this is a great market. This is going to grow. And this is the market that we need to be in. Remember, we knew nothing of grocery retail, other than the fact that we had sold some groceries online. We had no idea of how to run a store. So we went learning from scratch. And fortunately, since it's early days and there were no really benchmarks, we sort of built the business from the ground up. And a lot of what we learned during that journey from 2002 till 2006 is actually reflected in Big Basket today, in terms of what technology we should use, how do you do merchandising, how do you manage inventory, how do you, what suppliers relationship did you build, how do you build a private label portfolio. A lot of the learnings really came from that. And that was a great journey. We started from in 2002, built out that entire business till 2006. We were, I think, about 400 stores across the south of India by that time.
Yes.
And then sold to Aditya Birla Retail, who bought this because they were getting into retail at that point in time, and they wanted a platform to sort of fuel that journey. And so they bought this, rebranded it to More. And very strangely, just about a year back, More passed on to Amazon. So it's been quite an eventful journey. And so that business really stayed with us. We had done grocery, we had done online. And then in 2011, when this entire online retail really started picking up, and we found that more and more customers were coming online, broadband was becoming the norm. We said this is a good time for us to now go back to the drawing board. We had done online, but really not taken it to completion. We had done offline, but we had not done online grocery retail. We saw that this was a great opportunity. So the team sort of got back together again, launched this in December 2011. And we started with Bangalore and then added Hyderabad and Mumbai in 2012, and tied up with you guys around that time. And then I remember meeting Shiva around that time. And then went on from there. And we are in about 26 cities now. We have multiple business models, online grocery. We have BB Daily, which is a subscription service, B2B business, and we're adding on more as we go along. So that's really how it came about. Entrepreneurship is a series of accidental events. It's sort of can be shown to be linear at some point in time, but that's essentially what happened.
Great. And in terms of business now, what have you seen the changes since the shutdown, and what are the lessons that you guys have learned in terms of meeting the extraordinary demand that you came across over the past 4-5 years?
It was a very, this is, you could never have asked for a better baptism by fire for any team than when this happened. Because essentially when this happened, the company just shut down. And for the first 3-4 days, nobody had a clue what to do. And we weren't sure what, and you had restrictive, licensing everywhere. You had to go to the DCP's office to get licensed somewhere. Somebody said, you can't deliver. Somebody said, you can deliver only between morning to noon. You can't deliver in the afternoon. And all sorts of stuff which was happening in every city. And this is something which you're not good at. We've never interfaced with the government. We've never interfaced with the local administration to figure out how to operate a business. We've stayed away from them and blithely carried on. So this was for us a key lesson. We actually got everybody involved, formed a war room, and we would actually, the management team and the entire founding team would actually meet twice a day and just put down roles, saying, we said these are the cities that we need to actually reach the local administrations, reach to the PMO office, figure out how to actually get this entire thing operationalized, get permissions in place, meet the local DM, DCPs, secretaries everywhere of the governments. And that was one big task. And for about a month, this was almost like a stock market. Okay, we got so many, and now we can deliver so many orders. So that was one big challenge. And I think that there we really learned how to, we had to scale up a team very rapidly in terms of capability to handle local administration, get them to understand why it was critical for them to allow us to operate, and put our people in front, get them to give us the permissions. Because it started very poorly. I mean, the first few times that our people ventured out, they got beaten up. And so there was a huge, everybody was scared, saying, should I go deliver, not deliver? Our delivery people say, no, I will not go out. So that was one issue. The second thing that happened, and which was our demand zoomed. On the other side, 70% of the people left. Because either they went back to the delivery people, warehousing people, either they went back to the towns or villages, or they said, this is too risky, I'm not venturing it out. Because people had been scared completely. So therefore, we were down to 30% capacity. Our demand was 150%. And customers were just, livid. And you think of an existing Big Basket customer who's been buying from us before COVID, can't even find a slot, can't even place an order. and has no access at all. And he doesn't want to go out. And he says, the whole reason I've been buying from you guys, and I'm loyal to you, and you guys don't even give me a slot. So just scaling up our capacity took the, we did multiple things, did multiple partnerships. We did partnership with Uber, we did partnership with Swiggy, we did partnerships with, a lot of recruitment agencies, with hotel associations, with third-party, organizations which are providing, manpower. And we put together some kind of loose coalition of people who could actually, at least start providing this service. And over a period of time, we built that capacity. And it took us, I think, about 2 to 3 months for us to get back to where we were. And today we would be roughly about 150% of where we were. So you've grown from 30% of what we were, 30% to 150%. And we've done the journey in roughly about 5 months. And so that was a massive scale up. And doing this in a time when people couldn't attend interviews, how do you get quality of people? How do you train them? How do you make sure they turn up? Absenteeism is high, and just making that work was one marathon logistical exercise. And I think our systems, processes have never been so stressed as they were during this period. The third part was really reassuring people and putting in safety protocols. So one of the first things we did was we said, let's take insurance for everybody, for all our people, all delivery people. We took this before anybody else and thought about it. We would give a policy to a person the day they joined, and we were very generous with that. Second, we provided hazard pay, and we continue to do that even today, saying that we will give you excess because you're delivering during this pandemic times. The third thing we did was we said we will cover your entire family in case of any medical emergency. So it's not just you, because the guy acquires the disease on the job. What do you do? You can't blame him for having given it to somebody else. We said we'll cover your entire family, and BigBasket will take all the costs of any medical emergency in your family. The fourth thing we did was we actually trained all of them. And we taught them what is social distancing. We created videos. We got doctors to come and scare the living daylights of all these guys. Because normally, if you look at it, these are young guys, delivery guys. They're not used to social distancing, keeping away, not wearing gloves, wearing masks. So we said, we have to create an environment and let's understand why this is so critical, and they follow those rules. So that happened. All this resulted in, we had a share of cases, but for the size of our workforce, remember we have about 30,000 people. We had very few cases. Number one, all the cases got, thanks to our protocols, got identified very early. Not a single person had to be hospitalized. We had absolutely no issues at all, and that continues in place today. So we are fairly.
There's no shutdowns or any kind of warehouse being out of pocket or anything like that.
So what we would do is anytime there was a case identified, we would because we knew who the people in contact, that person's contact with, we quarantine everybody, close the place down, 48 hours, sanitize the entire place, and then resume. And we kept doing that so that if this happened, and fortunately, luckily for us, we didn't have too much of infection. So we were. And even now, fortunately for us, it's been pretty low compared to what we're seeing everywhere else.
So I'm sure you would have seen this McKinsey study, which said that the adoption rate to buying online over the last 4 months is equal to what was the previous 12 years,
right?
At least in the US. And they had shown this graph, which goes straight up.
Right.
So what would you say in your case, the number of unique customers that were there before March and now? So would you say, is that 150% that you alluded to, or would you say?
About 100% today. It's about 100% today, but I think it'll continue growing. We've grown about 100% in the last 4 or 5 months compared to, let's say, March to where we are today. August, it's probably almost double. And so it's grown quite rapidly and continues to grow month on month. And I think that will continue to happen in India. I think online grocery is becoming more and more mainstream now. What this has done is to get a lot more people to sample, a lot more people to try out, and they've suddenly realized that this works well. So whether it's their mainstream, whether they move everything online or whether they stay half online, half offline, I'm quite sure that we are going to get a sizable share of a lot of tier 1 city customer wallets.
So at the beginning, I remember in April, May, when we were discussing and I had to help out, getting grocery, you had said that your demand was almost 5 or 6x.
Exactly.
What you could service. And where would you say that is today in terms of your...
So we have actually expanded capacity quite a bit.
Yeah, I would have.
We have about 2.5 to 3 times capacity from where we were before that. And we've done this in this very short period. But in terms of demand, we are probably about 2x of what we were before COVID.
So are you
continues to grow
today within the stipulated time, or you still are facing those?
No, I think no. Now I think we are practically normal. Most very rarely, unless there's a closure somewhere or there are issues locally. But otherwise, I think we are normal practically in all the cities we operate in. There is absolutely no issue anymore. And
so in terms of competition, now, I mean, I'm sure you've heard of Swiggy Instamart starting.
Right.
Started in Bangalore for 2-3 weeks.
Right.
And obviously, I follow some on the Twitter, so there's some reviews around it. I'm sure you follow it much more closely. How do you see them and Amazon and Flipkart coming into your space, and what kind of competition do you foresee?
If I were to just zoom out and give you sort of a top view, what's really going to happen? I think there are 3 large players who will continue to really, let's say 80 to 90% of the grocery market will really be with them, online and offline. And this one is obviously Reliance Jio. They're already very large and will continue to consolidate. They're online, offline, they've acquired future. The second is DMart, which will continue to be pretty large. Third is Amazon, and the fourth is us. Between the 4 of us, you will find that, and as this market grows and it matures, within online grocery, I think DMart does not exist. They may take some small shares, but I think online is really going to be the 3 of us, which is Amazon, us, and Jio. And the reason I'm not counting out Swiggy or not counting Swiggy or even Flipkart for this at this point in time is fundamentally that they don't have anything unique. In the case of Flipkart, they've been slow to the market. They're a little lost in the entire offering that they have, and they started much behind Amazon. They don't have the assortment in terms of the entire customer base that has adopted groceries for them. They're very tier 2 focused, tier 3 focused, which is where a lot of their customers come from. Online grocery today is largely tier 1 and tier 2 focused. So therefore, they are sort of missing in this entire piece. And I think since they've been late to the market and they still don't have their entire assortment or the entire capability in place, I think they're going to struggle. They're going to find it very hard to build any sizable market share. In spite of the fact that Walmart is probably the most pedigreed grocer in the world.
Yes.
I think in the Indian market, they're really going to find it very, very hard. The fifth is really Swiggy or all this, let me say, hyper-local delivery, and Jio will also do that. And maybe a lot of other people will. Dunzo does this. The issue with that is it actually replaces a lot of your Kirana shopping or the top-up shopping. So it's a small order, quickly delivered. So it's a 450, 500 rupee order today. Pre-COVID, it used to be 250, 300 rupees. In fact, we work with Dunzo. Dunzo buys from us and delivers. And so therefore, the order size is very small. It's very hard to deliver this economically. It makes sense for Swiggy because they're utilizing their their delivery workforce today, and that they will continue to scale this up. But I don't think it is a business which is ever going to make money for them. It's very hard to do so because fundamentally the cost of delivery is not something the customer is going to pay ever. Unless you are happy to pay 70 rupees on a 300 rupee order, I don't think Swiggy is going to make money. And that's really the challenge in that business. And which has been the challenge for if you look at food delivery businesses per se, which have low order sizes and not just in India, across the world, there's nobody who's profitable and at scale, right? Whether you take Just Eat and in European conditions, they are marginally profitable with with the kind of delivery charges we can only dream of. But if you look at anywhere else in the world, people are just not able to demonstrate, even in the US with scale, or in China where they lose loads of money. So it's a very hard business to make money off. And we think it's always going to therefore get limited because of that in terms of your capability to invest and all of that. Second, because you don't have the scale, grocery eventually becomes the large market of it, part of it really becomes a competition on price. So unless you have scale, you can't really play that game. And therefore the price differential really starts kicking in. And customers are very sensitive. At the end of the day, at 3% difference on a 1,000 rupee order is 30 rupees. But you'll be surprised how often customers will walk away. It will be 30 rupees on a grocery order, but will happily pay it on something else. That's the way, unfortunately, consumer psychology works. So it's very hard to bypass that.
So you feel that there will be only 3 or 4 which you...
Seriously, I mean, in the online grocery base, the 3 of us will probably have 85-90% share. The rest will sort of get consolidated out in roughly about 10%.
Got it.
And I think the one of the reasons you asked me earlier, and I didn't answer it completely, is the reason is the way we have built a BigBasket. There's a lot under the hood, which is hard to replicate. There's a lot that we have actually built in terms of process and technology, which is going to be very hard for anybody to match, including Amazon. And I think this came from a philosophy very early on when we got in the business, saying that let's build to world-class quality standards. So when we started, we didn't have any Indian benchmarks. So we used Ocado as a benchmark. Ocado is a British grocer.
Yes.
Probably the most automated, highest capex, leading edge technology. And we said we'll use their benchmarks. And we actually crossed them 4 or 5 years back. So whether it's on-time delivery, whether it's fill rate, whether it's complaints to orders, whether it's size of assortment, we are actually do better than most.
So we just want you to cross that.
And we benchmarked with Alibaba. Incidentally, Alibaba is an investor, and we actually benchmarked ourselves, our numbers with them. And when the first time we presented to their Chinese team, they didn't believe it. They said, these numbers can't be true. And we said, these are our numbers. And so we said, why don't you show what your numbers say? And they very sheepishly sort of presented. And they said, your numbers are very good. How do you guys do this? So therefore, there is a lot of technology and process which has gone into building this. So whether it's on time, we run 99.4, 99.5% on time. We run 99.9% fill rates. Remember, the largest assortment that any grocer offers in the country. We have the lowest complaints to order, lower than horizontal e-commerce sites. And we're dealing with fresh food and dealing with the lowest returns of any e-commerce business in the country and practically anywhere in the world, right? So therefore, these are metrics which are very hard to build. And this is achieved through a combination of technology and process. And therefore, that's what makes it unique. We have the highest inventory turnover of any grocery business in the country.
Yes. Also, one of the highest order rate also, right? Order size, right?
Yeah. So therefore, high order sizes, high customer retention, all of these contribute to making it a very powerful. On top of that, we built a supply chain, which is probably the finest in the country. We 80%, now it's about 85% of what we deliver fresh comes directly from farm. We bypassed the traditional supply chain a long time back. We have our own collection centers. We work with about 20,000 farmers directly. In fact, now we are setting up model farms where we train farmers on which are the best ways to increase output. How do you move to organic? How do you increase output in your farm? Which are the best soil water conservation technologies? All of that. So we are investing significantly in private label and significantly in terms of quality and making sure that we deliver that for a much higher customer experience.
Since you built so many moats, so I'm assuming the only way to compete with you is to buy you out.
Exactly.
Or compete with us. Because they can't build
with us. Or compete with us. That's the only way it works.
Great.
But jokes aside, I think that's the reason why we've been able to compete with Amazon. 4 years back when Amazon entered, most people would ask us, how will you survive Amazon? Now nobody asks us that. In fact, we're raising capital now, and not
now the question asked is, will Amazon buy you?
No, now not one investor asked me, and I was so surprised, saying what will happen, how will you compete with Amazon? Nobody asks that anymore. They assume that you will compete, you will continue to be where you are, you'll be the leading grocer, you'll maintain your market share. That's an tacit implicit assumption now, saying that you are not going anywhere. And I think that's a testament to what has happened in the market.
Sure. So I'll just open it up to the panel and let them ask a few questions, and then we may also get questions from the participants later on.
Perfect.
Sure. Go ahead, Siva.
Thank you, Vipul. Thank you for coming. So first of all, compliment to you, going from 30% to 150%. With 70% of your delivery team disappearing is absolutely incredible. And yes, I'm also one of your users of BigBasket. And
thank you.
And in pandemic, it was like a godsend, absolutely a godsend opportunity, and absolutely brilliant. So the question is, yes, thank you for sharing all your learnings and how you managed all this. And it's very, very nice to know that how you quickly went into this multiple partnerships, hotel association, getting people, because if 70 and they have feet on street, and when they disappeared, you have to really, really rally around, and you have never ever had to get permissions locally, and then obviously boys getting beaten up in the market. And obviously, I'm sure there'll be a lot of learnings from you, because we are also in a sense a very largely distributed market. Going forward with all this change, and obviously you also will be doing scenario planning for the next 3 years. what do you think has changed in the distribution model permanently? And what are the other evolution which will come in the distribution model?
I think the distribution model has been changing for quite some time. I think what has changed is the acceptability of customers. I'm talking of an from Indian context. I think online has become a mainstream distribution model for customers now. I don't think you will find a customer who does not know Amazon, does not know Flipkart, does not know Jio, or does not know Big Basket in the top 10 cities. In fact, we did a survey some months back, and we were running at 91% top of mind recall, which means 90% knew of us. Unfortunate thing is all 91% was not buying from us, but the fact is that they had heard of us, they knew what we were. So customers have got used to the fundamental idea that you can buy online. They've got used to the fundamental idea that you can pay online, that this is an accepted way, and that this is probably comes with its own benefits. Now, what will happen because of this? The pandemic is only, to my mind, the cusp of the change. The change will follow. You will find that a lot of industries will rapidly move online. And this will continue to gather pace. It's not actually going to slow down. Most people think is that in distribution channel evolution, this will go back to where it was pre-pandemic. It's exactly the reverse. It will continue to stay on the course where it is right now, which means more and more customers will shift towards online. More and more customers will consume online. More and more customers will pay online. And they'll use offline more for the experience than for really transactions. And this will continue to happen quite rapidly. And this will get facilitated by two factors. One is obviously, which is got because of the pandemic, but the bigger change that is happening is that the more traditional population in India, which was never going to come online without some really significant event, has come online. So when I think of people in their 50s and 60s, who would think, why should I buy from Amazon? I can buy from my local store. Why should I buy from Big Basket? There's no difference at all. I've suddenly discovered that this is easy to buy, that there's nothing to be afraid of, and that this works as well. And so therefore now you have a completely new set of customers who didn't exist before. On the other side, what's happening is that your new millennial customers were anyway on the path of consuming and buying everything online. They've practically moved 100% online, right? And so this two forces, that there's a fundamental change in customer segments shifting online. And I think that will continue to propel India in terms of online penetration very, very rapidly.
No, sorry. Yeah, thank you. I understand consumer behavior will move online. That right. My question was more on the way we will distribute physically. What I meant was that how do we handle what will be the operating challenges in respect of on-ground distribution going forward, whether in respect of manpower, in respect of infrastructure, in respect of how are you looking at managing the distribution part?
Okay, interesting question. I didn't understand it the first time around, but I understood it. So let me give you an example here. So we have our BB Daily business, which is because we supply only selected pockets in the city. What we used to do was we used to have salespeople on the ground who would actually go set up a stall in an apartment complex and sell to customers. Right, and they would enroll them, and then they would move on to the app. They would tell them how to download. They would tell them how to recharge their wallet, and they would transact. Now, when this pandemic happened, these guys are not even allowed inside the apartment.
Yes.
So theoretically, the business should have just gone to zero in terms of new customer acquisition. The reverse happened; it accelerated, and we realized that there were 3-4 things that we had to do to make this happen. First, we transformed the role of each of this people. So in fact, we have repurposed this entire sales team to say, you're no longer salespeople. You will not go on ground and do on-ground events anymore. What we will do, you are sales assistants. We will provide you tools, and you need to operate a completely different remote process of managing your customers. So there were 3 things we changed in that role. First, we said, please use your phone. These are the apartments that you are working with. Each of the apartment associations, and say, we want to provide this service. We'll give you an offer. Can you give us a list of employee intercoms or house numbers where we can actually call and offer them this service? And so therefore, in fact, what happened was a lot of associations got us onto their, in the community Zoom calls and said, you guys come and present, because this is something we want people to deliver. So it makes sense. So so these guys actually went and presented there. The second thing they did was we increased our telecalling quite significantly, right? The fourth thing was we started using digital medium and said, how do we reach these customers? So once we have identified customers, let's say I know this 25 apartments in this particular apartment complex who are not our customers. So I don't know their I may know their name or their flat number, but I really don't have any digital means of reaching them. So how do you reach these people digitally? So we figured out multiple things. We said, okay, let's look at who are their neighbors. Let's look at in this community, who are our customers. So we asked these people to call out to these customers, offered them referral campaigns saying, can you actually help us reach out to your customers? And this is what we'll do for you. If not, if you don't want something, we will actually give something to all your neighbors, right? We will ensure that we deliver everything for a party. Can you give us access to all these people? Tell them that you are sharing your numbers or their emails, IDs with us, and we'll reach out to them. So therefore, what was a very physical on-ground channel actually got converted to a tech-assisted, digital-assisted channel. So these guys really therefore started having dashboards. They built dashboards for them saying, these are all your customers. These are all the apartments. This is your market share. These are the number of apartments that you're not covered. And this is how you need to reach them. So it became really a goal saying, how do you use digital means to reach them? If you can't reach them digitally, how do you use proxy through associations, through community networks, and reach them and build that way? So the distribution channel really changed from becoming pure on ground and talking to customers directly to using a lot more technology, a lot more off-site calling to reach them. And I think this will continue to play out. The other place that we saw this happen, and again, this reflects the change that is happening in the market, is in the B2B. So we used to sell to all these Kirana stores. And obviously there what happens is that there is a salesperson who goes there. He doesn't collect orders. They all order through the app. But he sort of keeps in contact with them, tells them what's happening. These guys don't normally browse the app too much. Only when they have to place an order, they will actually look on the app, add the items and go away. So we said, how do we now in a situation like this, these guys are online. They at least know the app. We know where to reach them. How do we add on new customers? How do we add on new stores? Because we can't even go there, because our salespeople can't go. That guy may not like somebody coming in, and he's not willing to listen at that point in time. He's got too much on his hands itself. How do we reach these non-network stores? So there we did a partnership with all the FMCG brands and said, you have your outlets that you serve. Can you give us the list of outlets? Can you give us the contact names? And we will run a scheme on your products when we deliver them. Mm-hmm. So instead of you're giving me a scheme to run, I will actually run a scheme on your behalf. But in return, I want your list of outlets in this geography that we can cover. So we would do a joint program where we would run a scheme for their products. They would provide us access. We would actually reach out to all these people. So once we have this digitally, so you can either call them, you can show them PNs on the apps that they visit, you can track them digitally, and you can start talking to them. So that's how we build this digital interface even for a B2B business. And it continues even today. In fact, we are acquiring a lot of new customers and without anybody really making any calls anymore.
Understood. So one more supplementary question. See, in organizational structure, pre-COVID, obviously some department will be the most, we had taken the leadership position. During COVID, obviously the leadership changes because it's a crisis. Some department would come to the forefront, take charge. You could have even made some organizational changes. You would have empowered some set of people. You would have, have to really dramatic, especially when your demand goes to 150%. Right. So the need for speed was most important. So my question is that did you change your organizational structure? Did some departments or did some people, new talent emerge how did ideation and innovation work? And also the last point is the fear and panic obviously is there for people to enter the building. So how did you overcome safety concerns in the mind of the consumer?
Yeah. So I think the first one, obviously this was a completely unplanned thing. So initially we actually centralized. We went the other way around. We are very decentralized as a company today. In fact, local decisions are taken completely locally. But we realized that this was not a situation where you could have independent local responses and people would be really frozen stiff, not knowing what to do. So we actually went the other way around. We centralized decision making very dramatically in the first month. And which is but what we did was we actually expanded the central team. So we had about 20-25 people who were sort of the war council and said, these are the people who will take all the operational decisions. And this has people from all the departments. that's buying, marketing, operations, supply chain, all of them. And we said, this people will now continue. So, and this council really met very, very rigorously and decided and took all decisions and implemented them. So what that happened was that allowed us to take learnings from one place to another. Second, it allowed us to respond very rapidly. The third thing, which was very critical in a change, when you have a situation which is evolving very rapidly outside, is that you have to take decisions very quickly. So when you have decentralized decision making in a crisis, and if not everybody responds the same way, because everybody's response to a crisis, some people freeze, some people react courageously, some people start thinking and don't know what next to do, and some people don't know what to do. So therefore, responses can be very different. This helped us actually form a uniform response, tell people this is what is working, this is the way to do it, go out and do it. So I think we centralized. And then after the first one, we started forming local groups. For every large city, take Bangalore, Bombay, we formed a council of about 15, 20 people. And we replicated this centralized command that we had for the city. So that city actually has now, and this is how we've been operating. Each city now has 15 to 20 people who are part of the team, and they decide everything that is required for that city. And now slowly things are coming back to normal. We're going back to our original structure. The other thing, from the customer perspective, what we did was we did a fair bit of communication. We actually took videos of our process and sent out to customers. We told customers this is the way we are implementing processes. We implemented zero contact delivery. We trained our people to wear masks and gloves all the time and to sanitize before delivery. So a lot of customers actually were very surprised when they got deliveries. They said, actually the BigBasket guy came, put on gloves in front of me, opened my crate, put everything, walked back 6 steps, and then said, sir, please collect it. And then after I had collected and stepped in, took the thing back and went away. And they said, we were very surprised. How did you manage to train all these people? They're doing such a marvelous job. So I think that played out. And the other thing, Shiva, I've realized is that our people are very resilient, fundamentally, and they're very customer focused. As an organization, when you build a customer focused culture, people go to extraordinary lengths to service customers. And we found that a lot of, even when it was raining, if they had to deliver somebody, for example, one of the guys in Calcutta, and we had some half a dozen cases like this, went to deliver. And this was an old gentleman who had started getting a heart attack. And so this guy normally should have just run away and said, not my problem, I'm going home. He actually left his deliveries, called BigBasket, said, somebody take this thing. It took this guy, put him in an auto. I don't know how he found an auto in that. Took him to a hospital, got him admitted, and then came back. So you find amazing, instances of people rising to the occasion. And I think that happens when you let people do the role, when you let them, give them faith that the organization is behind you, and they realize that they're really making a difference to somebody else's life. And so we had multiple such instances. People sent us videos of, in Mumbai particularly, people wading through, water during monsoon in COVID times and delivering. And that guy is saying, I can't get my local grocer to come and deliver. Your guy is actually parked 3 kilometers away or 2 kilometers away. He's walked with the crates in the rain and come and deliver. So I think that makes a difference. And it is not that, these guys had any incentive to do this, or they had to, we had to go motivate them saying, please do this. They did this of their own volition. So I think that's really makes a difference.
So just quickly, one question, which is because you said you recruited a lot of people from various companies and in partnership condition and all. If you have to just name a single thing which helped you the most with manpower, what would that be?
I think the biggest thing which worked for us, it was the engagement we did with the hotel association. See what happens when all the restaurants closed down. So their staff were just laid off and they didn't have any employment, and there was no hope of these guys opening again. So we said, we will take these people on. We will provide them training. They're actually anyway good customer service people. They can't drive, or they may not be able to do all of that. But we said we'll provide additional drivers for them. They can go with the vans and they can actually deliver. And that worked very well. That provided us the single largest number of people.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you so much. Sorry, Sam. Partha, over.
So, Vipul, that that was the point that you said about the delivery guy helping the old man was very, very touching. That to me shows the level of respect and love you have in your organization, not words, but in reality. And I deeply admire it, because without that, you can't achieve that. And that's amazing. It's truly admirable. All respect to you guys for that. My question, as you would expect, will be around valuations and money and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
You said a bunch of 99+% metrics.
Right.
All of those are absolutely wonderful. It's a two-part question.
Right.
I love them. The question is, as you scale, so the pandemic, obviously, as Siva pointed out, with 30% of your workforce, you grew from 30% to 150%, 5x in a very short period. So you scaled up meteorically during this period. Obviously, I'm an employee in the company. I work harder during the pandemic than I did before, because everybody's doing their extra bit. When life goes back to normal, people will also try to go back a little bit to normal, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All these things will happen. As you scale, the first question is, how do you see these metrics evolve? I was a consultant years ago. I've seen as companies scale phenomenally, a lot of these metrics get whipsawed, especially when you go away from your core markets where you have tremendous logistics and training. When you go to newer markets, which are a little bit farther away from the main castle, things can whipsaw. So what are your thoughts on that? That's the first question. The second question is Amazon. And so I've studied Amazon as they went into groceries in the United States, because I lived there and I was a customer. They acquired Whole Foods, and one of the things they did was they integrated Whole Foods very beautifully with Amazon, and then they were able to bring Whole Foods customers into Amazon groceries, and then the other way around. Amazon customers into Whole Foods, made it beautiful. They executed it extremely well. And in India, Jio has done some form of it, not the same. They already have retail, and then they have acquired Future Group, and then they're doing this thing with all the Kiranas, etc.
Right.
Are you guys thinking in that sort of direction to integrate online, offline into your online? You obviously did it before.
Right.
As you grow and mature to handle all these whipsaw things that may happen later.
Sure. So the first part, Sam, is a very simple answer. These metrics have been constant for about 4 to 5 years now. So we hit these metrics a long time back, and they've not swayed. And they obviously dropped a little because we had to deal with the pandemic, but they've again come back to where they were before. So this is something very stable. So we don't see any impact on the metrics anymore. And we don't see any impact going forward, irrespective of what happens. On the competition bit, the integration with offline retail helps. And you can be pure online and still do a great job. Witness Ocado, which does not have in that sense, a retail presence. I think having a retail presence, offline retail presence, also complicates things. Most people assume that because you have the stores, you can go pick up from the stores and deliver. It doesn't work very well. Because you need to get then you have to show the customer the inventory of that store only. And imagine now you're logging in from Colaba, and Reliance has to decide now which place in Bombay do they show you which store do they show you the inventory of. And there are 3 stores. Now in real time, they have to decide, okay, this store I'll show the inventory. What you want, the item that you want may not be in that store. So the challenge in picking from physical stores, and which is what a lot of retailers have realized over a period of time, is that fill rates go for a toss. Your fill rates will drop by 10 to 15% versus the 99%. You'll go down to about 85% if you pick from a physical store, and which is exactly the challenge that Jio has today. For example, you can order and check. So therefore, and that pisses off customers in online customers. They just don't like it. When you order 10 items, particularly in grocery, you don't want even 1 item missing, because then you have to step out. And what's the whole point of ordering online?
Yeah,
and customers get livid. So it has a significant impact on customer NPS. So that's one issue. In fact, we find that customers where we don't deliver even 1 item in the first order, their retention rate drops by 20-30% compared to customers where you deliver a full order. It's that dramatic. One item out of 15, 20.
Wow.
Not even 5 items out of 15. So that's the impact, and this is data that we've been seeing for a long time. So that's the hard part of doing grocery. You have to deliver everything at the same time in the fastest possible time. And being where we are, where I am not bound by having a high price store sitting in a location. I operate dark stores which don't open to customers. I'm able to design them for online picking. I'm able to design them for efficiency to deliver home, and that allows us to become far more effective and efficient than the people who are store based do. Having said that, there are advantages to having an offline business. There is obviously a large offline business. So whether we'll get into offline or not, there are experiments that we are doing, for example, to figure out what kind of model will work best for offline. And we may eventually go there. But it's not necessary for us to go there. For our business, for the online grocery business, we can continue to expand, continue to build a very strong business, and continue to compete with the best, including Reliance, Amazon, based on what we have today.
Got it. Thank you.
Vipul, absolutely fascinating. Like I was almost taking notes and figuring out that how you manage during this period. My question is a little related to this offline online. So, as they say classically, pure online brands actually lose out on experience. Right. But you and Amazon are kind of online offline combo. You have an online experience, you have an offline experience, as well as you have also you also build up the image of the brand through whether it's Net Promoter Score or whether it's advertisement or whether. So if I have to tell you, if I have to ask you about the relative importance of your online experience, offline experience, and the like building of the image and building of the opinion around the brand. So how do you prioritize?
No, so when you're online, you have to tangibilize your brand essentially, and therefore every touch point with a customer becomes very important. Let me give you an example. So if you look at all the online retailers today, nobody offers voice service. They're the only people of scale who offer voice service today. Right? It's expensive. It costs me 0.5% per order in terms of cost. And as a CFO, it burns me every time. A customer calls customer service because that's a cost really that we're incurring. But the difference it makes to customers, because even in this online business, groceries, the profile of customers that you have want to actually pick up the phone and say, can I speak to somebody? I have a problem. And they want a response very rapidly. So just having that, makes customers happier. They know they can reach somebody. Otherwise, they have to write email. They get stuck somewhere, and it's impossible to figure out what to do. That's number one. Number two, how does that customer service respond? So, for example, we have a rule for all our customer call centers that a customer call has to be picked up in 3 rings, right? So it doesn't go to an IVR and keeps you on hold. So 95% of calls, and we have a metric for all our call centers, which we actually check personally, the founders on a weekly basis, saying how many calls are picked up, and 95% of our calls are picked up in 3 rings. Right? So that makes customers believe that, okay, fine, this is a company I can reach. If I have a problem, it will get escalated. I will get a response. And there is a very clear escalation level defined where within 24 hours, if the customer is unhappy, it lands on my table. Right? And I'm responding to customer service saying, this is what you need to do, or I'm calling the customer, or somebody else is calling the customer at our level. And that is very important because that's how you build. And that also demonstrates to the rest of the organization that you're very serious when it comes to customer service. So I think making that's one part of it. The second is, how does your customer service, the person who delivers, behaves? So if you look at our delivery people, they're unusual in one respect. They're the only people who enter your home. Right? In India, there are only 2 delivery people who enter the home. One is the gas cylinder guy, the other is the big basket guy. The gas cylinder guy, you don't have a choice. You don't want to lift that thing and carry it inside. So you say, please come and give it inside. Please enter my kitchen. And the same thing happens with big basket. Normally the delivery happens inside the home. Now, obviously, it's a little messy, but customers are very comfortable getting them in. So we need to train people to have clean feet, not smelly feet, for example. I mean, imagine training people to that level. What do you do when you cut the cord on the crate? Does it fall on the floor, or do you pick it up and put it in your pocket? Do you have a scissors available, or do you ask the customer for a pair of scissors when you cut the crate? So the minutiae that you need to take care of is so high, and all of that contributes to the ultimate customer experience. And And imagine training now 20,000 young, probably barely educated or slightly educated people in terms of customer service, getting them to be smile, getting them to actually do this with commitment. And that's what good training, that's what good organizational culture, and that's what good processes really result in. And I think that's where you actually make the brand far more tangible. And that's what finally results in customer retention and customer adoption.
What about, like brand building outside the customer experience? How critical is that for you guys? Because there'll be a competition.
Yeah, that is very critical. In fact, which is why we did the BCCL deal way back in 2012.
That time
earlier than
like
most people were. So I think we always recognize the fact. We came from a school of thought saying that we have to build a brand. So if you look at our revenues versus what we spent on brand building, not on promotion. In fact, a lot of if you look at a lot of e-commerce businesses spend a lot on discounts and promotions. We spent less on discounts and promotions and spent more on advertising. In that sense, our mix was very different from a lot of other brands, and which was very critical to us. So we have had, for example, brand surveys running every quarter. We run a brand survey which tracks what is the relative top of mind presence of us versus our competition brands, who's moving where, what are customer perceptions. We run a customer NPS survey every month, which gets about 20,000 responses a month. Right? We analyze that, which is on multiple dimensions, and it's pretty detailed, where we get to know how customers are thinking of us. People who buy from us and Grofers, what do they think of us? People who buy from us and Amazon, what do they think of us? People who buy from us and Jio, what do they think of us? And so therefore we are able to, use this data to really figure out how is our brand getting translated in the marketplace. And we're making those investments because we think the brand is very, very important.
Okay, thank you. I mean, maybe I can, come up to you someday and request you to speak in one of our, forums where what do you say we believe in very strongly? So how actually brand building is so critical.
Most marketers are guilty of not in India particularly. I've seen most marketers are guilty of spending on discounts and not spending enough on brand.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the
longer
that's
term.
the
Actually,
point
it's very expensive when you do that longer term, and actually comes to bite you later.
Thank you.
Great. Vipul, we've got a couple of questions from the audience. I'll just read them out. One was this, now you started doing this BB Daily.
Right.
So there is a delivery, used to be in four-wheeler, those small trucks that used to go to houses versus two-wheeler. How has been the experience at deliveries versus four-wheeler versus two-wheeler?
No, so we use both two-wheeler and four-wheeler. In the case of BB Daily, we did that because we started getting a large customer. We started, what happened was we couldn't deliver on a daily basis. So we told customers, you aggregate your orders, we'll come on this day of the week, we'll pick everything and deliver everything together. So we did that community delivery model for some time, which was a very pandemic response. It was good for those 3 months, and then we withdrew it because anyway, deliveries have gone back to normal. But the idea there was really to make sure that customers get the delivery, they don't need to step out, and that we are able to fill the demand without having to actually deliver individually. But otherwise, we use actually both bike and vans for our normal delivery. It depends on order size and the kind of products that you have. For example, if you have large bulky orders, it will automatically go into a van. It won't come in via bike. Or if it's a small order size with 5 items, it'll come via bike. But that gets decided. It's actually the algorithm decides that because it's only programmed to figure out what order should go on a bike, what order should go onto a van.
Got it. And another question is, Future Stores saw a lot of stockouts in the last 5-6 months for various reasons. And did it help Big Basket in this case?
I think it probably helped Jio more than us. But I think stockouts, what happens with stockouts is that customers will buy from a local store. Typically, if they go to a large store and they don't find 5 items, they'll go to the next store and buy it. So it's unlikely that they will, just for that, they will go online. So I would think it wouldn't have impacted us too much. It would have really helped the neighborhood stores in that territory.
Got it. So those were the questions, Vipul. Anybody else has any question for Vipul?
No, thank you. Other than thanking Vipul for his very insightful talk.
Yes.
Some of the futuristic thing which you're driven, but I really appreciate your thought around how you quickly leverage the whole hotel staff, and you said, and to add to your own people. And but most of the people come on scooters, no? So how did you manage that? They had to use their own transport.
Yeah, so therefore that was one of the bigger challenges we had, saying how do we get people, because a lot of them didn't have, the hotel staff did not have scooters at all, because most of them work in the same site, so they don't. So therefore we actually tied up with Bounce and Wogo and started using, providing those on a lease basis to these people to use during that period.
Uber and sorry?
Bounce and
Bounce.
Wogo. These are scooter providers, so they actually, and Rapido. So we were using some 3-4 of these services who could provide.
So Partha and Sami say there's so many insights there for us also, no? From
Yes, a lot.
Absolutely.
How they
A lot. I mean, Vipul, you have actually opened a can of worms. Partha and I are going to come and bother you now.
Happy to
Lots to learn from you.
I'm happy to speak anytime, and thank you for being a great supporter of BigBasket. Shiva, really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Look forward to working with all of you.
Thank you, Vipul.
Thank you.
For the
Thank you very much, Vipul. Thank
Bye.
you.